We recently finished up installing the back mount on this particular project, and the back is temporarily just set in place here at the bottom of this cooler. And today we're going to focus on the input-output junction box. Now, the input-output junction box I make in a number of different configurations. This is just my latest one. What the input-output box allows you to do is to take controls, switching controls, power, etc. from outside the cooler, items which will be mounted on the back, connections made to actually power the compressor, and move them from the inside to the outside and vice versa. So how we're going to do that is we're going to do that via a junction box. Like I said, that can be made in many different configurations. This is one that I'm currently making and I'm trying out in this project. On the sides of the junction box, you'll notice, and I can zoom in at this a little bit later, but I provide a number of weather-tight connectors, and these are a glandular type connectors in that when you pull wires through them, they tend to seal the environment. Now, none of these projects are going to be truly airtight, but I try to make them as, let's say, weather-tight as possible to simply reduce the emissions, the water loss or the water intake of the humidor over time. The tighter the project is, the better you'll actually have of control over the project. Unlike a lot of other wood humidors where the humidor requires a net negative ambient condition, a net negative RH ambient condition, and constantly bleeds water into your office or your home space where you keep the humidor, these coolers and these humidors do not require that. So, so this is the I/O box, and there's a couple of reasons why I use this configuration. Again, we're going to be bringing quite a few wires both in and out of the cooler. That's item number one. Two, we're going to leave you a little bit of room to work here, which allows you to coil up some wire if you want for, you know, expansion changes, whatever you'd like to do potentially in the future to you know, it just might make it easier if you're doing any modifications to your own humidor to be able to pull a little wire here, push a little wire back in, so you can neaten up the project and make it look good. There's only really one hole that we drill through the cooler, and that's going to be a part of what we do today. And that's to match the diameter of this hole here. And boy, I want to say that this is a 22 millimeter. I'll go ahead and I'll double check that. So what we're going to do is we're going to line this project up in a location right about in here. And I'm going to go ahead and zoom this in some for you. So it's going to reside somewhere in the bottom right hand corner. And there's a couple of things that we're going to need to be aware of. One is that the actual compressor is right about in this area. So we want an area which will allow us to go through the entire shell of the wine cooler so that we can run our wires and land in a convenient place in the back of the cooler so we can have easy access to those wires and not run it right into the back of the compressor. Now, I built a lot of this particular model wine cooler, and I know that there are no high or low pressure cooler gas lines running in the shell back in this area. One thing I also know is that since this is the original sensor, there are wires which run past this area and actually exit up here. Now, notice on the back side of the box, has 5 holes. So in order to mount this assembly and complete this step, we're going to need a couple of things. We're going to need an 1/8 inch drill, and what we're going to use that for is we're going to actually use those to pilot these holes in the back of the cooler, or in the back inner shell of the cooler, to hold this box with some very, very small number 8 sheet metal screws. They're stainless steel, by the way. We're also going to feed a conduit through this hole all the way through the back of the cooler, and that's going to protect and house your wires that run from the inside to the outside. Now, in order to do that, we're going to use this 29 millimeter or 1 1/8 hole saw. Now, for you guys that live overseas, I know some of these tools can be inhibitively expensive for you. If you think that's going to be a problem, if you do not have this tool or need this tool, obviously I can buy it here and ship it to you for a minimum of expense. It's been my experience that, again, some of the guys overseas, some of these very simple tools can be extremely expensive in other countries, and if that's going to be a problem for you, you need to let me know, and we can make sure that that's included in a part of your package. So a couple of things to notice about the IOJ box would be the cover on the front and the front screw mounting holes, holes on the back, which we talked about, and then on each side 2 glandular type rubber grommets. On one side the grommets are larger than the other generally, and the way I like to assemble this is I like to put the smaller grommets facing towards the edge of the cooler, because the least amount of wire traffic towards the edge of the cooler will be easier for you to work with than the larger amount of wire traffic. So the larger amount of wires are going to point towards the inside of the cooler. It would essentially be this way, inside this cooler. And these are going to be used to bring in and disperse those wires. Now, I've already done a little setup here on the inside of the shell, and basically it's not really precise. We don't really need some kind of exact fitment to put in this box. But there's a couple of things that you need to remember, a couple of things that you're going to need to take note of. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get up, I'm going to walk around the bottom of the box. I'm going to show you a little bit about how this goes in. Now, even though the lid here is upside down, that does not make much of a difference. This box essentially is going to reside just about in this area. And it's pretty important that we take note of a number of things when we install this box. First, I know you can't really see through the bottom of the cooler, but the compressor itself, its center point lines up right about here. The compressor's about this big. So what you want to make sure is that you have enough room, and when you drill this through, you're not going to drill in right into the back of the compressor and A, ruin it, and B, create a problem for yourself when attempting to fish and pull these wires. So we're going to try and move this as far to the edge of the cooler as we can and still be able to use these 2 grommet outlets to be able to pull our wires. So, you know, maybe 1.5 inches away from this wall, that should probably be okay. Now what I've also done is I brought in a couple of spacers here. This is 3/4 and 1/4 of an inch nominally. And I've also got myself a piece of tape, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this guy And I'm going to tape him here as a spacer up against the back wall. And this is of course just temporary. It's just a means by which that we can line up and try and get the I/O box as straight as we can. It doesn't have to be straight. It doesn't have to be level. It does not have to be perfect. Okay? That's not really the point of this. It has to be in there. It has to be secure. And the rest is aesthetics. But we all like a neat job, so try and make it as straight and as even as you can. So that extra piece there gives me about 1 inch. And I feel pretty good about that placement. So let me go zoom the camera in a little bit, see if we can get you a little bit better shot of what I'm doing. There we go. And now I've previously set up a driver drill. This is actually a driver, but I use this in this situation with this very small chuck just to make sure that I have the room to get in here and operate. Now we're going to be driving these 4 little 1/2 inch Phillips pan, they're truss head screws, to hold this I/O box in place. Now they're extremely short, they're self-tapping. Put too much pressure on them, just like the back, you can strip them out, you can tear it up. It's not really that big of a deal, but we want the box held firmly onto the back of the cooler. But in order to aid that, once we get settled with this position and once we get the holes drilled, we can actually come back and we can glue this box on with some of the adhesive that we used to glue the back. So that's what we're going to do. That's going to add some structural strength to the entire I/O assembly, and it's going to also make it a bit more weather tight. So without further ado, let's go in, and I'm going to start at the bottom left on your side, but the bottom right hole to me. And I'm going to start, and I'm just going to pilot that guy, and that's it. There's now a hole there. I'm going to grab my driver, or I would actually suggest to you that you simply do this by hand, because these will be extremely easy to strip out. Start the screw right like that. Find the hole. Okay. With one kind of missed attempt, you can see we have our first screw in, our first hole. Now look, now's our chance to get it kind of level. Go up into the opposite corner. I'm going to gently pilot another hole. Bring in another screw. This is just a little tedious and exasperating because it's hard to work in here. If these were not stainless, then we could use a magnet to hold them. Because we're stainless, and there we go. So at this point in time, the I/O junction box is mounted in the location that we want it. In the next video, set up the drill. I'm going to show you how to pilot the large hole, drill the large hole And then what we're going to do is we're going to look for wires. If I didn't mention it earlier, I know that there are wires in this section of the cooler. Anytime you're drilling through one of these projects, one of these humidors or wine coolers, you have to expect that there's a possibility that you hit something. So we're going to come back and we're going to tackle that next. Thanks.